On the international business scene, the UK pound has slumped to an all-time low against the dollar after Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng hinted at more tax cuts to come after last week's budget speech. It tumbled almost 5% to as low as $1.0327 in overnight trading, taking it below its 1985 low to the weakest since 1971. The pound clawed back some ground to about $1.05, but the sharp decline has fueled fears it could slump to parity by the end of the year. The euro also hit a fresh 20-year low amid recession and energy security fears. The French government will present a budget today that aims to renew Emmanuel Macron's fiscal credibility despite extra spending to cushion energy price shocks and the challenge of an emboldened opposition in parliament. After vast spendings during the COVID pandemic, the president's second-term economic plan seems built on keeping the deficit below 5% of economic output next year and below the European Union's 3% ceiling by 2027. Balancing tax and spending is becoming harder as France's economic outlook deteriorates and the costs of capping electricity and natural gas prices soars. The government has earmarked another 16 billion euros in the 2023 budget to prevent bills from rising more than 15%. Saudi Arabia says it has the potential to unlock enough copper to ease a looming shortage as the world makes an epic shift to clean energy. But the kingdom faces challenges that established mining countries already have solved. According to the Minister of Industry and Mineral Resources, Bandar bin Ibrahim El Korayev, key among those challenges are logistics and water supplies. As the world's largest oil producer seeks to unlock an estimated $1.3 trillion in mineral wealth, its mining industry needs investment in infrastructure. Commodities in China dropped as a surge in the dollar heaped pressure on markets already plagued by concerns over Chinese growth. Tin led losses among base metals traded in Shanghai, with copper also falling sharply by the midday break. Crude tracked international markets lower while producer stocks also fell, with China's biggest listed oil company, PetroChina, and aluminum giant China Hanwha Group hitting their lows for the year in Hong Kong. Oil prices fell for a second day on Monday on fears of lower fuel demand from an expected global recession sparked by rising worldwide interest rates and as a surge in U.S. dollar limits the ability of non-dollar consumers to purchase crude. Brent crude futures for November settlement slipped to $84.80 a barrel. The contract fell to as low as $84.51, the lowest since January 14th. You are watching Business Edge coming to you from News Central. We are live from our studios in Lagos, Nigeria. When we come back, the conversation heads to Mozambique, where a global watchdog is threatening to put the country on a gray list. We'll tell you all about it after the break. Mozambique has carried out a national risk assessment against money laundering and terrorist financing after the Financial Action Task Force, a global anti-money laundering body, beamed its searchlight on the socioeconomic activities of the country. The task force review was based on allegations of corruption, drug trafficking, tax fraud, environmental crimes, and kidnapping, which were rampant. The results showed that the Southern African country is on code red and now is at risk of more financial restrictions by being added to the global list of countries not doing enough to prevent money laundering and terrorist funding. The task force will review the gas-rich country's progress at a meeting next month in Paris. If it fails the review, Mozambique will join the list of several countries, including neighboring South Africa, facing the threat of penalties such as restrictions on its lenders assessing the worldwide financial system and a delay in global transactions. Joining me now from Maputo, Mozambique, is journalist and political and social analyst Fernando Lima. Fernando, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's just establish a bit of what was happening before now. So what we do know is that Mozambique has been struggling with sanctions from some of these various issues that the country has been having, socioeconomic infractions. Now it risks being grey listed. So what were some of these previous issues that have brought Mozambique to this point?
Mozambique was penalized in 2016 by IMF and Mozambican donors because of a number of debts that have not been mentioned to IMF. As a result of that, all donors cut budget support to the country. And so until May this year, Mozambique was in fact facing sanctions from the international community. So this situation has been reversed. As a result of that, IMF signed an agreement to fund the country with $470 million for a 3-year program. Other grants are on the pipe. Donors are also reacting positively following this decision by IMF. The problems you mentioned are real problems. The country has a very loose legislation regarding money laundering and all the stuff you mentioned, kidnappings and all sorts of illegal activities in the country. I would say that the government is trying its best, tracing corruption, improving police in terms of dealing with kidnapping. So eventually, in the Paris meeting, the government of Mozambique will show up with a number of strong arguments in order to avoid further sanctions which can damage the image of the country and make a stop on the current positive development after IMF had signed the changes in Mozambique attitude.
Okay, so we can establish that these issues do exist for Mozambique and unfortunately have led to a number of sanctions. But as you said now, the government is attempting to solve these issues and move forward and present some kind of solution, some kind of plan at the meeting next month in Paris. But beyond that, this perception that Mozambique is a hub for corrupt practices, tax fraud, money laundering, even crimes of kidnapping for ransom. What were some of the factors that made it seem like this perception has blown at this point in time?
Well, the reality is that the government has not a very active attitude in relation to corruption and all this stuff you mentioned. In fact, there is a speech, a formal speech against corruption, but then in drug trafficking is the reality in the country.
Fernando, are you with me?
A big difference between practical attitudes and speech.
All right, so we're going to go on a quick break and let's see if we can't work out some of those technical issues with our guests from Mozambique. And of course, look at some of the recommendations that have been made as to how Mozambique can avoid getting gray listed. But beyond that, if it's what is happened, what decides or what is going to happen in the next month, what will be the consequences for Mozambique? And what exactly has the government been doing to find a way out of this after this break? My guest is Fernando Lima. He's a journalist and political and social analyst joining me from Maputo, Mozambique, as we look at the fact that Mozambique could be gray listed anytime by the Financial Action Task Force, which is a global anti-money laundering body, because of some issues that the country is having. So, Fernando, right before we went for that break, we were talking about the perception of how the perception of Mozambique as a hub for corrupt practices, tax fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, and even kidnapping kidnapping for ransom came about. But let's move on to this. So we see that Mozambique recently carried out a national risk assessment of money laundering and terrorist financing, which flagged a high risk of financial crimes. I want us to look at this a bit. So what kind of crimes are we talking about? What kind of movement and flow are we seeing of money in and out and around Mozambique that is putting it under the radar of the Financial Action Task Force?
Well, I think that the government for many years did take the appropriate measures against this money laundering activities on the drug trafficking issues, and as well as kidnapping, mainly kidnapping of businessmen. I think the Ministry of Finance, the Bank of Mozambique, and all other authorities were not aware of the seriousness of this kind of issues. In addition to that, Mozambique was heavily penalized by the so-called scandal of hidden debts. Since 2016, Mozambique has failed to declare a $2.2 billion loan from Credit Suisse and Russian bank BTB, and it was penalized by IMF and international donors that stopped financing the budget of Mozambique in result of that failure in terms of compliance in relation to foreign loans. So this situation has been reversed this year. In fact, Mozambique is put on trial those involved on that scandal. There's no sentence yet, but it is expected that a sentence will be released this year. And as a result of these actions by the Mozambican government, IMF decided to reverse its position in May this year, and now there is a $470 million for a 3-year program with Mozambique. In addition to that, donor countries are now coming back, and they are willing to support the budget as well as bilateral programs. So this all means good news to Mozambique. Of course, what you are saying about money laundering and all the other stuff that will be discussed in Paris are bad news for Mozambique, and I expect the government to show up with a number of initiatives they have taken in order to prevent those problems. And well, I'm confident, and I'm saying I'm confident speaking with the government officials that they will overcome all these bad news in that report related to money laundering.
Fernando, what I'm getting from you is a sense that Mozambique has been doing the right thing, the necessary things, and when that meeting holds in Paris next month, the country should not, as of right now, let's just say, should not be grey listed. But let's look at this. According to the Deputy Director of Mozambique's Financial Intelligence Unit, Amorim Bila, the government is actually yet to comply fully with most of the recommendations of the Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group on what it must do to avoid being placed on the Financial Action Task Force's grey list. So there seems to be a bit of, I guess, a difference in viewing this situation right now. That task force or that group saying you haven't done enough to stay away from this, and you're telling us that you believe the government has done enough. What are some of the recommendations that are coming from that group, from the Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group, on what Mozambique needs to do?
Well, Mozambique has all the interest in enforcing all different measures regarding money laundering, imposing draconian measures on the financial sector, on financial transactions, and this is already in action in in Mozambique. In fact, the business sector is quite concerned on new bureaucracy in terms of control of financial transactions. A number of banks have been heavily penalized on certain transactions that did not look too clear for the central bank. So what I would say is that Mozambique can show up in Paris with a record of a number of initiatives that they have taken in order to avoid more penalties regarding the country and regarding the country in its relation with foreign donors, foreign investors.
Fernando, before I let you go, let's just say for the sake of arguments, we get to that meeting in Paris next month. Mozambique makes its case to stay off of the gray list, but for some reason, the financial body decides, no, Mozambique needs to go on that gray list. They have just not done enough. What do you think the consequences of Mozambique being gray listed would be?
Well, this would be really, really bad news for the country. Why is that? Because the country is just recovering from a long period of sanctions against Mozambique. Gas projects are about to start in northern Mozambique. In addition to that, the country is facing a war in northern Mozambique, which means the country needs to have additional resources to pay for that war. And so having the country being sent to a gray list, it will be really, really bad news, and it will definitely penalize what I would say a good recover the country is doing. For example, the country expects to grow 3.1% this year, which in terms of an African context is pretty good figure. So definitely this will be really, really bad news.
It's Fernando Lima. We'll keep an eye on this. It's almost to the end of September, so we do have a few days now to October and to see how things play out with Mozambique at that Paris meeting. But we do wish the country the very best, especially given all the potential that Mozambique has, and we hope that this is not a stumbling stone for the country. Fernando, thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
All right. It's a situation we will be following closely. Gray listing, we know about blacklisting, we know about, of course, red flags and all of that. But the gray list would affect Mozambique in several ways. One, lenders would have an issue accessing the international markets. And then there would also be a situation around delays for global transactions. All of this could affect the economy and have knockdown effects for the investments that Mozambique seeks to bring in. So it's a conversation we'll continue to watch. The meeting is in Paris. It's happening next month, and we will definitely have an update. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, let's give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on more closer to now. Stick around. And as we wrap things up, here are a few stories that we're keeping track of. In North Africa, Egypt is seeking to raise close to $6 billion before the middle of next year by selling stakes in state-owned businesses as it seeks to revive an economy hit by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The country's planning minister, Halal Al-Said, said the program may include share offerings to the public or block sales to strategic investors. Businesses in East Africa are asking governments to consider lowering money transfer charges, which they say are adding to costs in the absence of stable exchange rates. Private sector players are particularly troubled by rising fees on mobile money transfers and the cost of remittances and payments. Total Energies will have to answer to charges of environmental and human rights abuse before the European Union Parliament in Brussels in a new threat to the actualization of its East African crude oil pipeline and related upstream oil projects in Uganda's Lake Albert region. The European Parliament summoned the CEO to appear before the Parliamentary Committee on Environment, Food and Natural Resources, as well as that of Human Rights. And Sovereign Africa Ratings says South Africa generally has a good credit quality, and its default risk is currently remaining low. The agency explains the country's credit worthiness, giving South Africa a BBB long-term and a B+ short-term rating with a stable outlook. It views the country's sovereign status contradict those of the big three, that's Moody's Investor Services, S&P Global, and Fitch Ratings, which together account for about 95% of international rating activity, having all been around for over 100 years. And that's Business Edge for today. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Download our mobile app, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and watch us on the platforms we're available. DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and many others. Until next time, I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Have a profitable week.